Charlotte Sinclair sat in silence in the vast expanse of her luxurious room at the Sinclair estate. The opulent space, adorned with deep red velvet drapes, intricately carved mahogany furniture, and a grand gold-gilded bed, should have been a sanctuary of comfort and safety. But tonight it felt nothing more than a gilded cage, trapping her within. Her gaze fell upon the marriage contract laid neatly on the desk. The name Victor Harrington was boldly printed at the bottom of the page, tightening a knot in her chest. He wasn't just a wealthy businessman. He was infamous for being ruthless, domineering, and insatiably ambitious. Everyone in high society knew Victor never did anything unless it benefited him. So why did he want to marry her? The answer was glaringly obvious. He wanted to seize control of the Sinclair empire. Her family's company teetered on the brink of collapse due to her father George Sinclair's poor business decisions. Merging with Harrington Group was the only way to save it, and the price of that deal was her. A transactional marriage, an inescapable golden prison placed before her, leaving her with no choice. Charlotte clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms, forcing herself to hold back the tears. Her whole life, she had lived under the expectations of her parents, trapped in the image of a perfect heiress. But now she was being sold like a mere commodity. The engagement ceremony was swift and extravagant, a spectacle befitting the elite. The entire city marveled at the union of two powerful families, but only Charlotte knew the truth. Behind the sparkling champagne and polite smiles lay a waking nightmare. That evening, after the guests had departed, Victor took her back to Harrington Manor. He no longer needed to pretend. In the dimly lit study, he shattered his glass of whiskey against the floor before grabbing Charlotte's wrist, yanking her toward him. "You think you can manipulate me, Charlotte?" His voice was ice cold, laced with a dangerous undercurrent. "Let me go," she struggled, but his grip was too strong. He chuckled, a cruel smirk playing on his lips as he brushed his fingers across her cheek before gripping her chin tightly. "From now on, you belong to me. There will be no divorce, no escape. You will be my wife, and you will obey me." Charlotte's entire body trembled with fear. At that moment, she realized the horrifying truth. Victor didn't just want her family's wealth, he wanted complete control over her. It was then that she knew, if she stayed, she would never have a chance to escape. That night, when the entire mansion had fallen into deep slumber, Charlotte quietly opened her wardrobe, retrieving a simple dress and a shawl. She stood before the mirror. The refined, aristocratic heiress was now disguising herself as a common girl. No more luxurious gowns, no more dazzling jewelry, just a desperate woman searching for freedom. She tiptoed out, her heart pounding violently. If she got caught, there would be no second chance. Slipping through the back garden, she reached a small gate, one that had never been locked. The night air was cold, but it was nothing compared to the terror tightening around her chest. And then she ran away from Harrington Manor, from a forced marriage, from the fate others had imposed upon her. She boarded the first bus out of the city with no idea where she was going or what she would do. The only thing she knew was she could never go back. From a wealthy heiress, she now had nothing but the clothes on her back. No identity, no money, only herself and the road ahead. The new city bustled with life, unfamiliar and indifferent. The streets were filled with strangers, none of whom recognized her, none of whom cared who she was. It was terrifying, but also liberating. She wandered aimlessly, lost in a sea of people, until her eyes caught sight of a small, handwritten notice pinned to a wall. Hiring, housekeeper needed to care for the master of the estate, high salary, no experience required. Charlotte's gaze lingered on the address. Julian Westwood. The name felt oddly familiar, yet she couldn't place where she had heard it before. She hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. This could be her only chance, to have shelter, to start over. Steeling herself, she stepped forward and knocked on the door. "Welcome to today's story. May you always be safe, happy, and blessed. Let us know which city you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to become a member of the Soul Stories family. Invite your friends and loved ones to enjoy these meaningful stories together." After a long night of wandering, Charlotte found herself standing before the imposing wrought iron gates of Westwood Manor. The grand estate loomed at the outskirts of the city, isolated and majestic like a fortress. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, swallowing hard as her gaze fell upon the brass nameplate affixed to the gate. Westwood Manor. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward and pressed the doorbell. The chime echoed through the silent surroundings. A few moments later, a middle-aged woman emerged from within. Her silver-streaked hair was neatly pulled back, and her sharp eyes peered out from behind thin-rimmed glasses. This was Eleanor Carter, the manor's housekeeper. "What do you need, miss?" Eleanor asked, her tone calm yet distant. Charlotte immediately lowered her head, adjusting her voice to suit her new identity. "I saw the job posting. I would like to apply as a housemaid." Eleanor's eyes swept over her, assessing her from head to toe. Even though Charlotte had deliberately chosen the simplest clothes, there was still an air of elegance about her. Too poised, too refined. Someone like her did not belong among the poor seeking work. "I'm sorry, but you are not suitable for this position," Eleanor said decisively and turned to leave. Panic surged through Charlotte. She lunged forward, gripping the iron gate desperately. "Please, I need this job. I can do anything. I'm not afraid of hard work." Eleanor hesitated, a flicker of curiosity in her gaze. She had little patience for deception, but there was something in Charlotte's eyes, a raw, desperate sincerity. "Why do you need this job so badly?" Charlotte pressed her lips together. She couldn't tell the truth. "Because I have nowhere else to go." Eleanor remained silent for a long moment before sighing. "This estate is not a place where just anyone can enter. My master is very particular. He does not like strangers in his space." Charlotte clenched her fists. "I'm only asking for a chance. If I don't do well, you can dismiss me anytime." Eleanor studied her once more, then gave a small nod. "Fine, I'll give you a trial. But remember, one mistake and you're out." Charlotte nearly burst into tears from relief. She bowed her head repeatedly in gratitude as Eleanor opened the gate and led her inside. Westwood Manor was as grand as it was imposing. Towering white columns, intricately designed fountains, and vast gardens surrounded the estate, exuding an air of timeless elegance. Yet despite its beauty, the atmosphere felt strangely hollow, cold, lifeless, as if time had forgotten this place. As they walked through the halls, Eleanor spoke in a measured tone. "My master does not like socializing. He lost his sight after an accident, and since then, he has become difficult. If you wish to keep this job, there are 2 rules you must follow. 1, do not pity him. 2, do not disturb him unless absolutely necessary." Charlotte nodded. She had no choice but to comply. This was her only chance at a fresh start. Her first day at work did not go smoothly. Assigned to clean the front area of the manor and prepare Julian Westwood's study, Charlotte quickly realized that everything here was maintained with near-obsessive precision. Every surface gleamed, every object meticulously placed. It was clear the household staff operated under strict expectations. By midday, after an exhausting morning, Charlotte stepped outside to collect a delivery from a supply truck. As she lifted a heavy box, a sudden gust of wind threw her off balance. She staggered, her grip slipping, and then she crashed into someone stepping out of the main entrance. Thud! The box tumbled to the ground, and the man she had collided with took a step back, nearly losing his footing. Heart hammering in panic, Charlotte looked up and froze. A tall man stood before her, clad in a crisp white dress shirt and dark trousers. Even though his eyes were unfocused, there was an undeniable aura of cold authority surrounding him. Julian Westwood. Though he couldn't see her, he instinctively perceived the sudden intrusion. His expression hardened, his presence commanding. "Who are you?" His voice was deep, sharp, a blade cutting through the air. I'm so sorry," Charlotte stammered, hastily bowing. "It was an accident." Julian's brows furrowed. "Eleanor, who is this? Who allowed her into my house?" Hearing the tension in his tone, Eleanor rushed over, her face taut with concern. "Sir, she is the new maid. I hired her this morning." Julian's head tilted slightly toward Charlotte, his expression unreadable, but his words carried absolute authority. "Fire her immediately." Charlotte's face turned pale. If she was dismissed now, she had nowhere else to go. Without thinking, she lunged forward, gripping the sleeve of Julian's shirt, her voice trembling. "Please, sir, don't send me away. I truly need this job." Julian stiffened slightly at the contact. For a brief second, his usually unreadable expression faltered, as if he could feel the desperation in her touch. His frown deepened in irritation. But before he could speak, Eleanor interjected. "Sir, perhaps we should give her a chance. She worked hard to be here. And besides, you are currently in need of a personal assistant. I believe she could fill that role." A tense silence stretched between them. Eleanor knew Julian detested having anyone too close. But there was something different about this girl, something that made her worth reconsidering. After a long pause, Julian exhaled sharply and pulled his arm away. "I do not need charity," he muttered. "If she stays, she had better be competent. I will not tolerate incompetence or mistakes." Charlotte nodded fervently. "I promise, I will do my best." Without another word, Julian turned and walked back into the manor, leaving Charlotte standing there, breathless. She had barely managed to hold on to this opportunity. Now she would do everything in her power not to lose it. After Julian left, Eleanor patted Charlotte lightly on the shoulder. "It seems you've secured the job, but remember, this is just the beginning. Julian Westwood is not easy to deal with." Charlotte swallowed hard, her gaze following the silhouette of the man she had just collided with. A man who had lost his sight, yet carried a darkness deeper than anyone she had ever met. She had escaped one prison, but was she now stepping into another? From the very first day Charlotte set foot in Westwood Manor, Julian made it abundantly clear that he despised her presence. "Don't touch my things unless I allow you to," he said coldly when she tried to tidy up his desk. "Don't enter a room if I'm inside. Don't ever think I need your help." Every day she had to endure those icy words. There wasn't a shred of kindness or tolerance in his demeanor. Even though he couldn't see her, he sensed her every move, no matter how careful she was. Once, as she tried to pull out a chair for him, Julian abruptly snapped, "I am not a cripple. I can do it myself." Charlotte pressed her lips together. She realized he wasn't just resisting her, he was resisting his own fate. But she didn't give up. Even though he constantly pushed her away, she remained persistent. She brought him his drinks, prepared his clothes, and gently guided him through the halls of the manor. She never pitied him. She simply did her job with quiet dedication. And little by little, Julian stopped snapping at her as often. One afternoon, while tidying up Julian's study, Charlotte noticed a picture frame placed face down on his desk. Curious, she picked it up. The photograph captured a young woman with long, cascading curls and gentle blue eyes. But what caught Charlotte's attention the most was the man standing beside her, Julian. In the photo, he still had his sight, and on his face, there was the faint trace of a smile. Had Julian ever smiled like that? Unable to suppress her curiosity, she softly asked, "Who is she?" The room instantly turned cold. Julian sat motionless in his chair, his blind eyes staring straight ahead, yet his voice, when he finally spoke, was laced with bitterness. "She's the woman who left me the moment I lost my sight," he said, his voice hoarse, as if tangled in an old unhealed wound. "She couldn't bear the thought of being with a blind man, so she left without a single word." Charlotte felt an ache in her chest. So this was why Julian was so distant, so cold. He wasn't emotionless. He was merely shielding himself from more pain. Gently, she placed the frame back onto the desk. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Julian said nothing, but for the first time, Charlotte felt as though the distance between them had begun to close, just a little. That night, just as Charlotte was about to go to sleep, a strange sound echoed from Julian's room. She rushed toward the noise. Through the slightly ajar door, she saw him lying rigidly on his bed, his breath rapid and uneven. Beads of sweat glistened on his forehead, his hands gripping the bedsheets tightly. "No! Stop!" Charlotte froze. He was having a nightmare. Without hesitation, she stepped inside and gently touched his arm. "Julian!" Julian jolted awake, his arms swinging out instinctively. For a brief moment, Charlotte felt her wrist caught in his grip. His hand was ice cold, his fingers trembling. "It's me," she whispered. "Charlotte." His breath came in sharp, uneven gasps. Then, realization. His grip loosened, and he quickly released her, retreating as if ashamed. But Charlotte didn't step back. "That nightmare, was it about the accident?" she asked softly. Julian didn't answer. She could see it now, the vulnerability buried beneath his cold demeanor. He wasn't as emotionless as he wanted the world to believe. He carried wounds, ones that haunted him even in sleep. Charlotte slowly sat down beside his bed. "It's okay," she murmured. "I'll stay until you fall asleep again." Julian said nothing, but for the first time, he didn't push her away. That entire night, Charlotte remained by his side, keeping watch over his restless sleep. After that night, something changed between them. Julian no longer lashed out at her for no reason, nor did he push her away every time she approached. He began allowing her to help him more. Each morning, Charlotte assisted him in choosing his clothes. "What color is it this time?" Julian asked. "Navy blue," she replied. "It suits you." He nodded slightly. No protest, no resistance. She guided him through the manor, helping him adjust to the subtle rearrangements Eleanor made. At times, she even helped with the smallest things, fastening the buttons of his shirt, pouring him a glass of water, and he no longer objected. They were small changes, but to Charlotte, they meant everything. One afternoon, while arranging books in Julian's study, Charlotte misstepped. Julian, though unable to see, instinctively reached out to catch her. They both froze. His hand had found her face. His fingers brushed against her cheek, tracing along the curve of her nose, the soft outline of her lips. He furrowed his brows slightly. "Charlotte!" His voice dipped, quieter than before. Charlotte stiffened, her breath catching in her throat. Her heartbeat raced wildly. Then, just as slowly as he had reached for her, Julian withdrew his hand. "Sorry," he murmured. Charlotte didn't understand why, but a strange disappointment settled in her chest. From that moment on, she knew. Something between them had shifted. Something unnamed, but it had begun to grow. Charlotte walked slowly through the quiet halls of Westwood Manor, carrying a tray of tea for Julian, as she did every evening. But as she neared his study, an unfamiliar voice drifted through the slightly ajar door. "There's been new information about the accident, Sir Westwood." She froze in place, her heartbeat pounding against her ribs. An instinctive fear gripped her, compelling her to step back, press herself against the cold wall, and listen. Julian's voice cut through the silence, low and controlled, but laced with restrained fury. "Still no solid evidence?" "We've followed multiple leads and they all point to one name. Harrington Group," the man reported. "There's no direct proof yet, but a series of suspicious financial transactions took place right before the accident. Some witnesses might have known something, but they've either disappeared or refused to speak." Charlotte felt an icy chill run down her spine. Harrington Group. It couldn't be a coincidence. She knew who was behind this. Victor. He hadn't just set out to ruin her family. He had gone after Julian, too. Why? Because Julian was a potential rival? Or had this been his plan all along, to strip her of everything, to leave nothing but destruction in his wake? She clenched her fists to stop them from trembling. If Julian learned the truth, he wouldn't stop. He would investigate, he would confront Victor, and that would put him in danger. She couldn't let that happen. She had to protect him, even if it meant sacrificing herself. Charlotte couldn't sleep that night. She tossed and turned, her mind tangled with the weight of 1,000 conflicting thoughts. Should she tell Julian the truth? Should she let him decide his own fate? But if she did, it would be the same as pushing him into Victor's trap. And Victor, a man who stopped at nothing to get what he wanted, would not hesitate to strike again. Her eyes drifted toward Julian. He was asleep, his face more peaceful than usual. One of his hands rested loosely on the bed, fingers curling slightly as if reaching for something in his dreams. Charlotte bit her lip, feeling a painful squeeze in her chest. She couldn't lose him. But if she kept this secret forever, would she be betraying his love? The next day, Julian noticed something was off. Charlotte was quieter, more distant, her eyes carrying a weight she couldn't speak aloud. As she arranged the documents on his desk, Julian suddenly reached out, catching her wrist and pulling her close. "Charlotte." She gasped softly, startled. He couldn't see her, but he could sense every little change in her. "What are you hiding from me?" His voice was low, firm, almost piercing through her defenses. Charlotte shook her head quickly, forcing a smile. "Nothing." Julian tightened his grip. "Tell me the truth." His breath brushed against her cheek, and suddenly there was barely any space left between them. "Julian, But before she could say another word, Julian tilted his head downward, and his lips met hers. The kiss was gentle, yet filled with an unspoken yearning, as if it had been restrained for too long. Charlotte's eyes widened, her body momentarily frozen, but then she closed them and surrendered to him. That kiss was not just a claim, it was a declaration. They didn't need words to know that they belonged to each other, and that night she gave herself to him. They had become one, completely and irrevocably. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight peeked through the curtains, Charlotte slowly opened her eyes. Julian was still asleep beside her, his breathing steady, his features relaxed in a way she had rarely seen before. She carefully slipped out of bed, determined to wake him and finally tell him the truth. But just as she stepped toward the door, a voice stopped her cold. "Charlotte Sinclair." Her entire body went rigid. "No." She turned around and it felt as though the ground had vanished beneath her feet. Victor Harrington stood in the middle of the grand foyer. He wasn't alone. 2 towering bodyguards flanked him, their eyes cold and predatory. Charlotte's breath hitched, panic clawing at her chest. Her gaze flickered toward the upper floor, where Julian still lay sleeping, unaware of the danger lurking below. She couldn't let them wake him. She had to protect him. "Surprised?" Victor smirked, his voice dripping with mockery. "I thought you were dead, but instead, you've been hiding here, playing house with a blind man?" Charlotte clenched her fists. "What do you want, Victor?" He stepped forward, his slow, deliberate movements filled with menace. "You really thought you could run from me forever?" he drawled. "No, Charlotte. I've let you run for long enough." His voice dropped lower, each word laced with unspoken threats. "You're coming back with me. We're getting married, just as planned." Charlotte shook her head, defiance burning in her eyes. "Never." Victor's smirk vanished. His expression darkened, his tone sharpening to something icy and lethal. "Then I'll kill Julian Westwood, right here, right now." Charlotte's blood ran cold. He knew how much Julian meant to her. "You can't." "Oh, but I can." Victor tilted his head slightly, his smirk returning. "An accident, a break-in, a robbery gone wrong. So many ways for a man to disappear forever." Charlotte sucked in a shaky breath, terror widening her eyes. She couldn't let Julian be harmed. She had no other choice. Charlotte sat in Julian's room watching him sleep. She knew this might be the last time she would ever see him like this. A silent tear slipped down her cheek, soaking into the pillow beside him. Her hands trembled as she reached for a piece of paper on his desk, picked up a pen, and began to write. "Julian, I'm sorry. The truth is, I am not just an ordinary girl with no name. I am Charlotte Sinclair. I ran away from my engagement with Victor Harrington, and I know he is the one behind your accident. But I cannot let you be in danger. If I stay, he will never leave you alone. That is why I have to go. Don't look for me. Forget me. I love you." Charlotte placed the letter gently on the desk, her tears smudging a few words on the page. She turned back toward Julian, taking in every detail of his face, the face she had come to love more than anything. Her chest ached with an unbearable pain. Then, without another word, she quietly stepped out of the room, out of the manor, and into the darkness, where Victor was waiting. She didn't look back. She couldn't let Julian know that she loved him more than she loved herself. Charlotte stood motionless before the towering mirror in the opulent bridal suite of the city's grandest hotel. The reflection staring back at her was that of a flawless bride, adorned in an immaculate white wedding gown, its intricate lace and shimmering pearls woven into delicate patterns. A small tiara rested atop her head, securing a sheer veil that cascaded over her face, hiding the despair in her eyes. She looked like the perfect bride, but this was far from a perfect wedding. For over 2 weeks, Victor had kept her under strict confinement, cutting off all contact with the outside world. No matter how many times she resisted, he was relentless. His threats were as calculated as they were merciless, stripping away every option she had. "As long as you marry me, this will all be over," Victor had murmured, lifting her chin with a smirk that sent chills down her spine. "You will be Mrs. Harrington, and I will leave Westwood alone. But if you still think about running—" His fingers tightened around her wrist, his grip like a vice, his gaze cold and predatory. Charlotte had no illusions about what his words meant. If she didn't comply, Julian would die. She had no other choice. The soft chime of the wedding march echoed through the grand cathedral, signaling the arrival of the bride. Standing just outside the towering doors, Charlotte could hear the quiet hum of hundreds of guests waiting expectantly inside, eager to witness the grand spectacle, the union of two of the most powerful families. But every step she took toward the entrance felt like a noose tightening around her soul. She forced herself forward, swallowing the panic rising in her throat. The aisle stretched endlessly before her, lined with pristine white roses, golden chandeliers, and the weight of countless gazes. But to Charlotte, this wasn't a path to a new life. It was a slow walk to her own execution. At the altar, Victor stood tall, dressed in an impeccably tailored black suit, his expression one of absolute triumph. He had won. He had broken her. No one knew. No one in this grand, dazzling ceremony knew that the radiant bride walking toward her groom was silently screaming for help. No one, except one person. Just as Charlotte reached the altar, the massive cathedral doors suddenly burst open. The sound of heavy wood slamming against stone silenced the entire room. A deep, commanding voice rang out, sharp with fury and unshakable resolve. "Stop! She belongs to me!" The world around her seemed to freeze. The murmurs of the guests faded into stunned silence. Charlotte's breath caught in her throat. The voice, it was unmistakable. Her heart pounded wildly, disbelief coursing through her veins as she turned slowly, almost afraid that this was just another cruel trick of fate. But there he was, Julian Westwood. He stood tall at the entrance, his very presence consuming the room with an aura of raw power and determination. His black suit was crisp, perfectly fitted, his shoulders squared with authority. His chiseled jaw was set, his features hardened with both fury and something deeper, something far more dangerous. But what left Charlotte breathless, what made her knees nearly buckle beneath her, was his eyes. They were no longer empty, no longer lost in darkness. They were looking straight at her. He could see. A collective gasp rippled through the cathedral. The weight of shocked murmurs pressed against the thick tension in the air. Victor's smirk vanished, his entire posture stiffening, his eyes narrowing with lethal precision. "Westwood!" His voice was razor-sharp, filled with disbelief and simmering rage. "You were supposed to be blind." Julian took a step forward, the weight of his presence suffocating. His gaze never wavered from Charlotte. "I had surgery." His voice was steady, firm, undeniable. Charlotte couldn't breathe. He had found her. He had never given up on her. And now he was here. For her. The air in the cathedral grew suffocating, thick with tension as Julian stepped forward, his every movement exuding unshakable determination. His gaze locked onto Victor, unwavering, his voice low but filled with authority. "Let her go." Victor let out a sharp laugh, his smirk laced with mockery. "Do you really think you can just walk in here and take her back so easily?" His tone dripped with amusement, but there was an underlying menace in his eyes. Julian didn't waste words. He turned to Charlotte instead, and in that moment, the fire in his eyes softened. "Charlotte, come to me." Charlotte's breath hitched. Her whole body trembled, and before she could stop them, tears spilled down her cheeks. The sound of her name on his lips, the sheer conviction in his voice, shattered every last wall she had tried to build. She took a hesitant step forward, her heart pounding with desperate hope. But before she could reach him, a cold metallic click sliced through the air. Gasps erupted around the cathedral. Charlotte's blood ran cold. Victor had drawn a gun. A hush fell over the room, the chaos dissolving into a terrible, suffocating silence. Westwood! Victor's voice was thick with venom. His hand was steady, his aim unwavering, straight at Julian. His lips curled into a sneer, his finger pressing against the trigger. You were blind, and now you can see. Is that right? Well then, I'll make sure you return to darkness. Forever. Charlotte's heart pounded violently. Her eyes darted to Victor's hand, to the tightening of his grip on the gun, to the slight motion of his finger pulling back the trigger. He was going to shoot. There was no time to think, no time to hesitate. She ran. Bang! The gunshot tore through the air, deafening, final. For a moment, the world stood still. Charlotte's breath caught in her throat. A searing, unbearable pain tore through her body, spreading like fire. Her vision blurred as something warm and wet soaked through the delicate lace of her gown. Red. A deep, blooming crimson against the pristine white of her dress. The cathedral erupted into horrified screams. Gasps, shouts, the clatter of chairs. None of it reached her. The only thing she felt was the way her knees buckled beneath her, the way the strength drained from her limbs. And then, arms caught her. Strong, familiar, trembling. Julian. His face was ashen, his eyes wide with terror, his breath ragged. He held her close, his grip tightening as if sheer willpower could hold her together. Charlotte! His voice cracked, raw with agony. No! No! Stay with me! She tried to smile, but her lips barely moved. Her hand trembled as she reached up, brushing against his cheek. Julian, you came for me. Her voice was barely a whisper. Don't talk. Just hold on, he pleaded, his arms tightening around her, as if he could keep her from slipping away. But the blood, so much blood, was soaking through his hands, staining them red. The wail of sirens pierced the air. The grand cathedral doors burst open again. But this time, it wasn't just one man standing in defiance. It was the police. Armed officers stormed inside, their weapons drawn, their voices barking commands. Within seconds, Victor was surrounded. Before he could make a move, a figure tackled him to the ground. A sharp click of handcuffs snapped around his wrists as a firm voice read him his fate. Victor Harrington, you are under arrest for multiple charges, including conspiracy to commit murder, financial crimes, and orchestrating the accident involving Julian Westwood. Victor thrashed, his teeth bared in rage, but it was over. He had lost, but Julian didn't care. He didn't even spare Victor a glance, because in his arms, Charlotte was slipping away. Charlotte's vision blurred, the world around her fading into a haze. She felt the creeping cold seep into her body, numbing her limbs. But Julian's hands, his hands were still warm, still holding on to her like an anchor. You can't leave me, Julian whispered, his voice hoarse, trembling. Please, don't go. A tear slipped from his eye, falling onto her cheek. Charlotte mustered a faint smile. I love you, Julian. And then, darkness, blood. It was everywhere, splattered across Julian's hands, soaking into the pristine white marble of the cathedral floor, staining the delicate lace of Charlotte's wedding gown. The image of her collapsing in his arms, her breath fading, her eyes losing focus. It was a knife straight through his soul, tearing apart everything he had ever known about pain. He had never been so afraid. When the ambulance arrived, he shouted at them, begged them to hurry. He climbed into the vehicle beside her, clutching her hand as the sirens wailed through the streets. Every second stretched into an endless nightmare. Charlotte, open your eyes, look at me. No response, and her hand, once so full of warmth, was growing colder in his grasp. The moment they reached the hospital, the paramedics rushed her into the emergency ward. Julian tried to follow, his every instinct screaming at him to stay by her side, but the doctors pushed him back. We need to operate immediately. If you don't move, she may not make it. The doors of the operating room slammed shut in his face, and Julian could do nothing. Nothing. 7 hours. He didn't know how long he had been standing there, only that every passing minute was torture. He felt nothing, no hunger, no exhaustion, only raw, relentless pain consuming his every thought. Charlotte was somewhere beyond those cold, sterile doors, trapped between life and death. and he was powerless to help her. Julian had never believed in God, but in that moment he prayed like a desperate man. Please, whoever can hear me, don't take her from me. I'll do anything. Just don't let her die. But there was no answer. Only the relentless, indifferent ticking of the hospital clock. When the doctor finally emerged from the operating room, Julian all but lunged forward, his breath ragged, his entire being teetering on the edge of desperation. He didn't care for decorum, for patience, for anything. He only needed to know if she was alive. The surgery was successful. The words barely registered before Julian's knees nearly gave out beneath him. Relief crashed over him like a tidal wave, leaving him momentarily weightless. But then, the doctor continued, however, she hasn't regained consciousness yet. We can't guarantee anything. It all depends on her will to fight. Julian's chest tightened painfully. Her will to fight? That couldn't be. Charlotte was a warrior. She had fought through pain, through fear, through the cruel hands of fate. She wouldn't leave him. She couldn't. Without another thought, he shoved past the doctor, storming into the hospital room, and the moment he saw her, his entire world collapsed. Charlotte lay on the hospital bed, her face so pale it nearly blended into the stark white sheets. The machines beeped steadily beside her, their rhythmic sounds a cruel reminder of how fragile she was. 4 lines snaked around her arms, an oxygen tube rested against her lips, and a heart monitor ticked away, as if counting down the seconds between hope and devastation. Julian sank into the chair beside her, his hands trembling as he reached for hers. Cold, so unbearably cold. His throat constricted as he laced his fingers through hers, holding on as if sheer force of will could keep her tethered to him. Charlotte! His voice came out broken, his breath unsteady. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. She didn't answer. She didn't move. She simply lay there, a fallen angel, trapped between life and death. A paralyzing fear wrapped around his chest, squeezing the air from his lungs. Could he really lose her? No, he refused to accept that. Julian had never known true helplessness until now. He sat by her bedside, clutching her fragile hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles over her skin, desperate to feel any sign of warmth. Time had lost all meaning. Minutes, hours, days blurred into a tormenting haze. He didn't eat, didn't sleep. He simply stayed. And he talked. He spoke to her as if she could hear him, as if his words could pull her back to him. He told her about the first time they met, about how infuriatingly stubborn she had been, how she never let his coldness push her away. He described the way she laughed, the way her presence brought color into his world even before he could see. But she remained silent, still, unmoving. The weight of his exhaustion bore down on him, but he never let go of her hand. His vision blurred, his body weary beyond comprehension, yet he held on. You promised you wouldn't leave me. Remember? His voice cracked, barely above a whisper. If you wake up, I swear I'll never let you go again. I swear it, Charlotte. A tear slipped down his cheek, falling onto the back of her hand. And then, he felt it, something warm, something wet. His breath hitched. A single tear had slipped from the corner of her eye. She was crying. Julian's entire body went rigid. He stared at her in disbelief, his heart hammering against his ribs. She could hear him. She was still here. A sob caught in his throat as he tightened his hold on her hand, pressing it against his lips. I know you can hear me, Charlotte. Stay with me. Please. I need you. The next morning, the first golden rays of dawn filtered through the hospital blinds, casting soft light over the sterile room. Julian sat slumped against the bed, his forehead resting on their joined hands, exhaustion weighing heavily on his body. Then, a faint movement, a twitch, a whisper of motion against his palm. Julian's breath stilled. His head shot up, eyes locked onto her delicate fingers. And then he saw it. Her hand trembled, once, twice, and then her eyelids fluttered. A single second stretched into eternity before her lashes lifted, revealing a pair of tired, glassy eyes. But they were open, and they were looking at him. For a moment, Julian couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. And then her lips parted, her voice barely a whisper, but filled with life. "Julian, I'm back." His world shattered. A choke sound escaped him as he buried his face against her hand, his body trembling as every emotion. Relief, agony, love spilled over. The tears he had been holding back for days finally broke free, but this time they were not of despair. They were of pure, unfiltered joy. She had returned to him, and this time he would never let her go. When Charlotte opened her eyes, her breath was still weak, but in them shone a flicker of life. Julian felt something inside him break free, a flood of emotions crashing over him all at once. His hand tightened around hers as though letting go would make her disappear. She was real. She was here. After all the agonizing days of waiting, after the torment of watching her slip away in his arms, after feeling utterly powerless, she had come back to him. And when she looked at him, those familiar eyes filled with warmth and love, his world finally came back to life. Julian took a deep breath, steadying himself before reaching into the pocket of his vest. His fingers brushed against something small and cold, yet within it held all the unspoken words he had been carrying in his heart. Rising to his feet, he stepped closer, his heartbeat erratic. And then he knelt. The hospital lights caught the glint of the ring between his fingers, the diamond sparkling like a lone star against the sterile white room. Charlotte's eyes widened, fresh tears spilling over as she stared at him in disbelief. She had never expected this moment. Not here, not now, in the very place where she had fought for her life. But Julian's gaze never wavered, his voice low but filled with an undeniable certainty. "I once lived in darkness, but you were the only light I ever found, and I can't lose you again, Charlotte. Marry me." Everything else faded. The beeping monitors, the scent of antiseptic in the air, the cold sterility of the hospital room, none of it mattered. There was only him, looking at her with a love so deep it left her breathless. Charlotte lifted a trembling hand to cover her mouth, her heart hammering inside her chest. There was no doubt, no hesitation. She had known the answer long before he even asked. Tears of joy cascaded down her cheeks as she nodded, her voice breaking but filled with certainty. "Yes, Julian. Yes, I will marry you." Julian smiled, a real, unguarded smile, one that she had longed to see for so long. With the gentlest touch, he slid the ring onto her finger, sealing his vow. From this moment forward, she belonged to him, and he belonged to her. Charlotte couldn't contain the emotion surging through her. She threw her arms around him, bearing her face into his shoulder, feeling the warmth and strength she had almost lost. They held each other tightly, their heartbeats merging as one, as if nothing in the world could ever separate them again. A year later, beneath the crisp blue sky of autumn, Charlotte stood before the mirror, clad in a pristine white wedding gown. No more fear, no more nightmares, only happiness, only love. This time, she was stepping into marriage of her own free will, with a heart unburdened, with a love she had chosen. At the end of the aisle, Julian waited. His eyes never left her, filled with deep, unwavering devotion. He had once been lost, trapped in his own darkness. But now he was standing there, waiting for her, smiling at her with the warmth of a man who had finally found his home. When Charlotte reached him, he took her hands, their fingers intertwining in an unspoken promise. The world around them disappeared, leaving only the two of them in this sacred moment. Their wedding was not extravagant, not filled with ostentatious displays of wealth or grandeur. It was simple, intimate, yet more beautiful than any lavish celebration. When Julian leaned down to kiss her, the entire room erupted into applause, but all Charlotte could feel was him, his lips, his warmth, his promise. No more pain, no more separation. They had found each other again after all the storms, after all the trials. After the wedding, they returned to their lives, but everything was different now. Julian resumed his work, but he was no longer a man consumed by it. He made time for Charlotte, for their life together. She was his priority, his greatest treasure. And Charlotte, after everything she had endured, she made a choice. She would not let other women suffer the same fate she once had. With Julian's support, she established a foundation for women in need, offering them shelter, protection, and the chance to reclaim their freedom. Together they built a future, not just for themselves but for those who needed hope. And this time, nothing could take that away from them. Their life wasn't always perfect, but they always had each other. And then 2 years after their wedding, their happiness became even more complete. Charlotte was pregnant. The moment she told him, Julian froze, completely still for a few seconds, as if he couldn't believe what he had just heard. Then, without warning, he pulled her into his arms, his voice trembling with overwhelming emotion. "Is it true, Charlotte? Are you really carrying our child?" His hands instinctively found their way to her stomach, resting gently over the small life growing inside her. His breath shuddered as the realization sank in. They were going to be a real family. The following months became the sweetest of their lives. Julian spent more time at home, caring for Charlotte in every possible way, from meticulously choosing her meals, arranging the nursery, to spending late nights reading books on newborns. Every evening, without fail, he would place his hand on her belly, whispering soft stories about the world to their unborn child. And then, the day finally came. Charlotte clutched Julian's hand through every contraction, her grip tight, her body trembling with pain. But he never let go. When their baby's first cry echoed through the hospital room, Julian felt something inside him shatter, a wave of pure, uncontainable love, unlike anything he had ever known. Tears streamed down his face as he gazed at the tiny, perfect being in his arms, a baby boy with the same deep blue eyes as his father. Charlotte, exhausted but smiling, looked up at him. "What should we name him?" she whispered. Julian stared down at the small life he was holding, then looked back at Charlotte. His voice was gentle, full of love, full of promise. "Ethan Westwood." Charlotte nodded, her eyes shining with happiness. From that day forward, Westwood Manor was no longer a cold, empty place. It was filled with laughter, with the warmth of family, with the joyous sound of Julian lifting their son high into the air, while Charlotte watched, her heart overflowing with love. Their life was no longer a story of tragedy. It was one of love, of healing, of a future built together. Julian had once believed he was destined to live in darkness, but Charlotte had come and become his light. Now that light no longer belonged to just her, but to Ethan as well, the small, beating heart that was the purest proof of their love. They had lost each other once, but this time they would never let go again. Together they built a life not free from challenges but full of love and hope. Because true love is not just about promises, it is about perseverance, about sacrifice, about choosing to fight for each other no matter the cost. Charlotte and Julian proved that no matter how cruel fate may seem, as long as two hearts find their way back to each other, there will always be a path forward. And perhaps the greatest lesson of all, happiness is not about perfection, it is about cherishing the moments together. Most of all, love is not just finding light in the darkness, it is becoming the light for the one you love. Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with your friends and family.